Thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to be here. Yes, so as Sophie was saying, I'm going to talk about Indian Islamic, and I just thought whilst being here, I would also take the opportunity to talk about the rebirth of Egyptomania in 20th century jewellery design as a very interesting topic. So obviously, and listening to Edward's talk earlier, there was always a strong interchange of ideas, and exotic influences that gone on centuries before the 20th century. But I really wanted to focus on the 20th century and its link to jewellery design, because this is when we see a number of exciting developments and some really beautiful designs coming through. And we're looking at the turn of the century, up until the end of it, beginning of the 20th, we had Art Nouveau. There was a lot of inspiration from Japanese art at the time. And then we start seeing this move into Art Deco. From as early about 1904 is when we start seeing the strong geometric designs that was a kind of signature style of the Art Deco movement. But similarly, at this time, we had a lot of exotic influences, I think exemplified very strongly in Diaghilev's Ballet Rouge, which started in 1909. And this image was part of the costumes designed by Leon Bakst in 1910. And you can see the fashions at the time were really changing, these wide pants, these wonderful turbans, this display of color. And this was seen very much in the jewelry designs at the time as well. Lots of colorful gems, lots of aigrettes and turban brooches. I remember a very, very famous example from this time. It's from 1911. And it was designed by Paul Uribe, and it was one of these fantastic carved Mogul emeralds, similar to the design that we just saw in Edward's talk. It's actually part of the Altani collection and recently sold, but it was the perfect example always to me, because it was this lovely kind of 17th, 18th century carved emerald in an aigrette, hexagonal shaped, and it was just perfectly juxtaposed against this Art Deco design with these sapphire, pearl, and diamond sprays coming out of the top, and perfect, and would have looked very much at home within these wonderful designs seen in the Ballet Rouge. And a fashion for Oriental and specifically Indian jewellery was widespread amongst the Parisian jewellers in the 20th century. We saw designs with the maisons such as Boucheron, such as Chaumet, but none really created as many pieces or seemed to have as much passion for it as Cartier. And for that reason, we're going to be seeing a lot of their designs in the talk this evening. You probably all have heard as well that, most recently we were very lucky to have the Cartier and Islamic Art in Search of Modernity exhibition at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. And some brilliant examples there seen of the pieces created by Cartier during this time. And part of their genius lay in their tagline of never copy, only create. And it was the motto of the three Cartier brothers, who were the grandsons of the Cartier founder Louis Francois. So Louis, Pierre, and Jacques, so they ran the Parisian, the New York, and the London maisons, in order, respectively. And they would never copy from an existing piece of jewelry. So they would always, Louis, for example, in Paris, he would tell his designers to walk around Paris with their sketchbook, look up at the architecture, take your inspiration from your surroundings. And Louis Cartier, Paris at this point was becoming a real hotspot of Islamic art, and he was a great collector himself. And his collection kind of fell into three categories. So he had his own personal library, which his father had started, and then he had a library and a collection of works that he actually opened up to his designers, so they could look at design portfolios, they could come and look at drawings, look at books, and he would actually loan out these pieces to exhibitions as well. There was a seminal exhibition on the subject of Islamic art at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in 1912. And so it's appreciating the way that the Islamic influences on jewelry, starting with this wonderful tiara made in 1936, and it's just showing, this lovely use of color, the use of turquoise, turquoise seen throughout Islamic art, and the parmet motif, but juxtaposed again against this beautiful kind of more abstract, more geometrical Art Deco design at the time. And it's almost the juxtaposition is so pronounced because of look at the way that they stand out against the diamonds. You can barely see any metal in between these diamonds, which at this time, the metal was platinum. This had only recently started to be used at the turn of the century by Cartier and really pioneered by them at this time. So in the past, if you wanted a white metal background behind diamonds, you had to use silver, which was very heavy. And because silver tarnished, you would have to back it with yellow gold to make sure that it didn't rub off onto clothes or to skin. But the Cartier brothers, Louis Cartier, said, if silver is the armor of jewelry, then platinum is the embroidery. And they could work it and actually make it this beautiful light material. You didn't need as much of it, very flexible and able to create these wonderful designs such as this. They also used the endless possibilities of Islamic geometric patterns and architecture, from which Cartier heavily borrowed in their 20th century designs. They used, for example, hexagonal stars in brooches with 12 points with pearls at the end of each one. And this famous amethyst and turquoise necklace was designed for the Duchess of Windsor in 1947, with its symmetrical layout referencing 19th century Islamic architecture, as well as the color combinations of the gems. Now, the Duchess of Windsor was an incredible art collector. She was actually the lady, her and the Duke of Windsor were the couple behind the idea of the Great Cats or the Panthère collection within Cartier that's still so famous today. She was also the one that proposed to Van Cleef & Arpels having the idea of a zip in jewelry, following the use of zips in couture designs at the time, such as those of Schiaparelli. And that now has culminated in the Van Cleef zip necklace that, again, is iconic and one of their signature designs today. And Louis Cartier, this use of these bright colors, he called it the peacock decor. So pushing design boundaries, like green and blue, for example, had never been seen before in jewelry design. He was drawing from the Islamic ceramics. So suddenly we see turquoise and lapis lazuli rubbing shoulders, as well as sapphires and emeralds. So this beautiful vanity case, it's showing as well here, so with the carved jade and the carved lapis at the center, a new color combination. So again, really juxtaposed against the geometric designs of Art Deco at the time. And these color combinations continued into their Indian influence designs. So such as this amazing carved emerald brooch by Cartier New York, dating to about 1920, probably about I would say more like 1925. So there's examples again of the blue sapphires against the green emeralds on the surround. And the Indian influences from Cartier were very much helped by Jacques Cartier's travel to the Middle East and to India from about 1911. And he had gone with the intention of, going to the source of the gems, going to the source of the pearls, and cutting out some of the middlemen on the way, and learning more about the cutting techniques. But he ended up collecting several Mughal gemstone treasures, such as these carved emeralds. And it was on this trip, so these emeralds as well, just to draw attention to the reason why that they were, found in Mughal India or came from there is because they were discovered, they existed before, but there was a real dearth of emeralds within the world up until about the 16th century. Before, supplies had maybe been in Egypt, but they were not of great quality and they were long since gone. And the Spanish conquest in Colombia uncovered these fantastic gems, and although sadly, terrible treatment of the indigenous Spanish tribes, but the indigenous Colombian tribes, the Spanish started bringing them back, these fantastic specimens from the Muso and the Chivor mines, bringing them back to Europe. And here they went into India, they went into Persia, but it was India that really had these fantastic gemstone cutters that would often carve, beautiful floral motifs on one side and Quranic verses in the other. And these were the pieces that came back and were taken by Jacques. And that was how his cutters started learning about these techniques as well. They were unsetting these pieces, looking at how it was done, and started replicating some of these designs themselves, which we will see in a few slides away. But it was on these trips and the ones after this that Jacques Cartier noticed something interesting, that whilst he was interested in obtaining the stones from India, learning how to cut them, and getting the supply chain a bit more narrowed down, he was noticing the Maharajas wanted their existing jewels broken up and the gems reset in European styles. One such client was the Maharaja of Patiala, a state in northern India. And it shows, how long that they had to develop these relationships, because it wasn't until 1925 that suddenly a chest full of diamonds and gemstones arrived at Cartier Paris, just with a note saying, "Make a necklace worthy of a king." And it took them 3 years to create this, the Patiala necklace. So it's set with just under 3,000 gems and diamonds. At the center is the yellow De Beers diamond that weighed just under 234 carats. And you can see that it's obviously kept the form of a traditional Indian necklace in terms of the layers, in terms of the tie at the back. But it's mounted in platinum, as was the style of the time. And Cartier was so pleased with it. It was their biggest single commission to date, and they asked the Maharaja if they could keep it on display for 1 week at the Cartier Paris headquarters, to which he kindly agreed. But after this, it becomes a bit of a mystery. The last time the necklace was seen in its full form was in 1941 by the Maharaja's son. And then after this point, it was presumably broken up and sold. Mysteriously, in 1982, the De Beers diamond reappeared at Sotheby's Geneva and was sold for $3.1 million. And in 1998, Eric Nussbaum, who was curator of Cartier's archives, actually started finding sections of the necklace in an antique jewelry shop. So he bought them and they started assembling it. So this necklace here, obviously on the right, is the original necklace being worn. This picture on the left is a replica of the necklace. So the original parts and the mounts, but set with cubic zirconia and synthetic rubies. Cartier estimate that if this was sold in its original form today, it would be somewhere in the region of $20 to $30 million. I think more, but... So, another key Cartier design from these travels is the tutti frutti style. Now, actually, the first tutti frutti jewel was made in 1901 for Queen Alexandra after she was gifted 3 Indian dresses by the wife of the Viceroy of India. But it was after Jacques' travels, unsetting these stones, seeing how they were cut, that Cartier started using these colored gemstones in this wonderful way that you see here. So carved ruby berries, carved emerald leaves, and the same with the sapphires as well. And again, juxtaposed against the Art Deco monochromatic style of the diamonds, edged as well. I loved this bracelet because just edged with that black enamel, which is so rare. Every one of these tutti frutti jewels is completely unique. There's no two the same. They're highly collectible, highly sought after. So much, intrinsic value if you're looking at that, maybe $20,000 to $30,000. But the style, what they represent, the age of them, highly, highly sought after. So much so that actually we sold this piece online at the height of the international lockdown in 2020. It was a single lot online auction, and at that time it was the highest price paid online for a piece of jewelry, reaching $1.34 million against a $600,000 to $800,000 estimate. This is another example here. So you can see tutti frutti, but very different in designs. Again, these wonderful carved emerald and ruby leaves, and set against the black enamel and the geometric designs here. And this was actually from the Lauder collection, so the famous cosmetic company. This one is from 1928. And you can see this is probably the most expensive tutti frutti bracelet, 2.1 million, sold against an estimate of 750 to $1 million. And this demonstrates the power of provenance. Actually having a previously known owner coming from a famous collection really does help get those prices up. I think probably our most famous example at Sotheby's is the Marie Antoinette pearl pendant, which we sold in 2018, which we estimated for $1 to $2 million, and the Marie Antoinette factor boosted it up to 36 million. So, can make a difference. And so, the Tutti Frutti design was first exhibited at the 1925 Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs, which is where the phrase Art Deco comes from. So interestingly, not coined until 1925. The exhibition was actually delayed because of the First World War. It was planned prior to this, but the Art Deco style started coming out much earlier. But the Tutti Frutti style gained much popularity amongst fashionable collectors at the time, such as this lady, Daisy Fellows. She's here photographed in 1937 by Cecil Beaton. She was the granddaughter of the Isaac Singer, who was the sewing machine entrepreneur. And she inherited a considerable fortune and sense of style. She was editor at Harper's Bazaar Arabia. She was friends with all the movers and the other kind of shakers at the time, including Coco Chanel. Even Coco Chanel was meant to be inspired by her style. And one of her most famous commissions started in the early 1920s and ended up with this Collier Hindu necklace. She actually had all of the gems are taken, most of the gems are taken from a necklace and 2 mismatched bracelets that she had previously acquired from Cartier. And they made it up. It was slightly different at the time. It had the traditional Indian cord at the back. It was actually her daughter, because Daisy Fellows passed away in 1962. This was inherited by her daughter, who actually amended it with the 2 carved sapphires in the clasp. She actually, sadly, she's photographed wearing it here, but there's only one known incident of her wearing it in public, and that was to a Venetian costume ball in 1951. And Sotheby's sold the necklace for $2.7 million in 1991, which at that stage was the most expensive Cartier jewels sold at auction, taken over by the Barbara Hutton jade necklace sold by Sotheby's about 10 years ago. And this can be seen now, so it's actually in the Cartier archives. Cartier quite often buy back from auction for their patrimonial collection, which they take out on exhibition, which means that we are lucky enough to see such designs. These are another couple of pieces of Daisy Fellows, this time from Van Cleef & Arpels, again in this lovely Indian style. They were made in 1926 and 1928, so lovely Art Deco themed, geometrical style with the emerald drops at the bottom. And they could be worn as 2 separate bracelets or connected together into a fabulous necklace. Again, part of Van Cleef's heritage collection, bought back from auction in 2005. So we're calling the Egyptomania the revival because it was, for a long time it had been a design inspiration, starting from Napoleon's campaign in Egypt in 1798. And that, when he went, actually kind of scientists and scholars went along as well. They were looking at what they uncovered from the region. I mean, Egypt's always a big source of inspiration. Jewellery, they loved it. Men and women would wear it across social classes. It was sent with people into the afterlife. So there was plenty to draw from and plenty to work with. In 1867, there was an exhibition in Paris, and this is when we start seeing, pieces by Boucheron, pieces by Malario being made at the time. However, in 1922, Howard Carter was on his final round of funding for his archaeological excavations. He had started in 1917, and he struck gold, quite literally. He found the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy king. And I quite liked his quote, the world was ready for it. It was damaged and depressed by war. But he wrote afterwards, one must suppose that at the time the general public was in a state of profound boredom with news of reparations, conferences and mandates, and craved for some new topic of conversation. The idea of buried treasure is one that appeals to most of us. Whatever the reason or combination of reasons, it is quite clear that once the initial Times dispatch had been published, no power on earth could shelter us from the light of the publicity that beat down upon us. We were helpless and had to make the best of it. And it started, Tootmania was something that was much more frenzied. This Nile style was everywhere, from the catwalk to cigarette cases to film. We had the Ten Commandments. It was all over. And obviously extended into jewellery design. So the earlier jewels that were designed by Charles Jacquot in Paris, under Louis Cartier's inspired direction, actually started earlier. There was geometry and stylization of Egyptian art and ornament. You know, there's lots of linear designs, lots of two-dimensional, and probably inspired by various exhibitions that Jacquot went to in the Louvre. But after 1922, Louis Cartier, again, these wonderful ancient Egyptian artifacts were part of his own personal collection. And after 1922, Cartier started making these incredible jewels that actually incorporated these pieces into the design. So Louis Cartier actually bought from a dealer a number of faience pieces, which we will see have been set into various styles. Due to this, there's only a very limited number of them available, only about 150 maximum, and obviously all one of a kind. So in 2013, Sotheby's New York were very lucky to introduce a number of these to auction, and they all made spectacular prices. These were part of Lady Abby's collection, and this one here, for example, this depicts a faience model of the goddess Sekhmet, so with her circular crown set with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. And she was the goddess, believed to be the daughter of Ra, the one that started the desert with her breath. And you can see, this one isn't included here, but this is the 1924 London News article about it, including Egyptian trinks from 1500 to 3000 years old, adapted as modern jewellery, brooches, pendants, earrings and hatpins set with real antiquities, and a Tutankhamun replica. Same with this one here, also Sekhmet as a faience piece in a kind of Egyptian fan brooch, so she's backed against a lapis lazuli sky set with diamonds, and this beautiful enamel and diamond surround. This is a beautiful piece made by Van Cleef & Arpels, one of two only made. And you can see it depicts here, we've got Ba, we've got the scarab beetle here, we have the birds here, but these are all pictorial. There wasn't any meaning to these hieroglyphics that were being used. It was all decorational, it was all part of the design. And again here, a wonderful piece by the smaller Maison Le Cloche, but again featuring the birds and a sphinx in these wonderful detailed panels with these calibre cut stones. So these are stones with these rubies, for example, that have been cut and polished for the piece. Very difficult craftsmanship to do, and showing the utmost care. And just looking at a few examples of how these pieces continue into today and their influence continues to be felt. So for example, we had the 125th anniversary of the German jewellery house Hemmeler, who started off making medals and are now at the cutting edge of some contemporary jewellery designs. And in a similar way, it's today run by Christian and Yasmin Hemmeler. Yasmin is Egyptian, and so she and the Hemmeler family have collected these ancient Egyptian artifacts for years, and in their revival collection in 2018, they included these in the designs. With the Indian influences, Viram Bhagat is a very famous contemporary Indian jeweler, and he continues in the same kind of ethos of, some traditional Indian styles, but set in platinum in slightly more European designs. Very highly sought after and make good prices at auction. And Islamic, here we go to the tradition of carving gemstones for use as talismanic amulets by the jeweller Joel Arthur Rosenthal, who is incredibly selective about who he makes his jewellery for. It says that he chooses you as his client and not the other way around. So auction is a very good avenue to purchase these jewels from, one of the few chances, and you can see they make very strong results against their original estimates the vast majority of the time. So thank you very much, and please, any questions for me or for Edward on his previous talk, then do let us know.
If anyone has any questions, one of my colleagues has a microphone at the back. So please raise your hand if you have any questions for Edward or for Sophie.
Hi. I have one question. It's in general about the estimate. What other factors are there that, other than the previous owner, that might have affected the estimate and the actual selling price?
Yeah, okay. I'll go first. Yes, it's a really good question. So for jewellery, it's a number of factors. I mean, for example, brands, signed pieces always command a premium by the major houses. So Boucheron, Cartier, Van Cleef, you know, those ones, contemporary jewelers such as Jarre, Bagat. Obviously, if they're not signed, then you're looking really at the intrinsic value of the diamonds and the gemstones that are set, and top quality diamonds and gems. So actually, you know, one 10-carat ruby can be vastly more expensive than another 10-carat ruby. You're looking, you know, not only at factors such as where they're from in the world, so Burmese rubies are considered, you know, the ultimate origin for rubies, same with sapphires, Burmese, Kashmir, Sri Lanka. But then it's also looking at the color, the clarity of it. These are all, you know, quite small details that, you know, would make up the value and could make a huge difference between a stone of a similar size. And then, yep, and provenance, absolutely. So, yeah, provenance can add, as we were discussing, a huge amount of value. I'm trying to think what else would be. The age of the piece as well. So deco jewels, for example, very strongly in demand. You know, such as those Tutti Frutti designs by Cartier, very limited. It's just the rarity of them that they're always highly sought after. Islamic art, Edward, what makes an estimate?
Well, I just make up the estimates as I go along. Well, estimating artworks is not an exact science. I think Islamic art is probably one of the most challenging areas when it comes to estimating, because no two pieces are alike. Islamic art doesn't feature on ArtNet. If you Google Islamic art prices on ArtNet, you won't find anything. You know, if you're selling a Picasso, you'll find any number of Picassos that have sold at auction privately, and you get a sort of a market price, fair market or open market price. Islamic art, it's yes, I mean, we when we're estimating a piece, we will go back and cross-check its similar pieces that have sold at auction, you know, to find a sort of starting point. But there are so many booster factors. Sophie mentioned provenance. Provenance is king today. For any museum collector, it's the first question they ask. Before they even look at the object, they'll ask you, what's the provenance? They're more interested in the paperwork than the art. Because for them, you know, they, in our more regulated, scrutinized and compliant world, the paperwork and the paper trail is all important. So provenance can massively enhance the value of a piece, particularly if you can take it back to before 1972, which is the year of the UNESCO Convention on Archaeological and artwork. So if you have proof of ownership outside country of origin before 1972, that is a huge factor and makes the piece much more attractive to particularly an institutional museum looking to buy. There are other booster factors like, well, obviously the rarity, whether it's, if I can use the phrase, eye candy, whether it's a beautiful object, whether it's going to look good in a gallery, whether it fits in with a particular acquisition policy of a given museum at a given time. You know, if I know that a collector is looking for a specific piece, obviously that could inform and influence my decision on the estimate. The market today is very much the best and the rest, so the top pieces have a huge premium attached to them. And I think for a non-specialist, the Islamic market is very confusing because you look at a catalogue and you'll see two pieces that look, to all intents and purposes, very similar. And one will be 10,000 and the other will be 100,000. And maybe there's a third piece that's 1 million. And you ask the question, well, why is there this huge disparity in financial value when I can't tell the difference? And the answer is that probably one of the pieces will be damaged and restored, and you won't notice that just by looking at it. You need to put it under an ultraviolet light. Another piece might have an extraordinary provenance, which is going to add a naught to its estimate. And the third piece for £1 million is going to be a real trophy, which is something that comes to the market once in a decade or even once in a generation. The 3 Shahnameh leaves that I referred to, sold at Sotheby's over the last 10 years. So in April 2011, we estimated this miniature painting at 2 to 3 million, and there was a Titanic, one of these gladiatorial spars I referred to between telephones, and it made £7.5 million from 2 to 3 million. When we next handled one of these miniature paintings, which was last October, we wondered how to estimate it because another auction house had sold one for 4 million 6 months before. So we decided on an estimate of 3 to 4 million, 3 to 5, and it made 8. So now, of course, there's a raised expectation. So another collector comes with a third one and expects 8 million as an estimate. And then you have to gently cajole them and explain that actually an attractive estimate generates a great price. And if you over-egg the estimate, it just looks, it creates suspicion in the eyes of the potential buyer. They think they're being set up. So auction estimates are often deliberately set at an attractive, conservative estimate because the challenge for us is always to get as many participants involved on the day. You don't want to sell it to one person on the reserve. You want to have competition. You want to have 10 people. You want to have 20 people. But you want to have more than one. That's the important thing. So the estimate, an estimate can be adjusted simply to entice a big price. And you saw the Clive fly whisk, 5 to 8 million. Sorry, 5 to 8,000. It made 800,000, 100 times the high estimate. So often the buyers and bidders and buyers will ignore the estimate. And once people get sort of involved, if you like, and get the adrenaline rush, that's when the sort of fireworks fly and you get extraordinary prices. And so the next miniature that we have from this series, which will be sold next month, we have it at 3 to 5 million. And if it sells between 3 and 5 million, the owner is going to be extremely cross with me. So,
I have a question, though.
Yes.
Because what it's reminding me of, but isn't it like the more that come to market, the less rare it seems? So the kind of magics, like because we had this with the blue diamond, where we sold beers called the blue, then after that we had another blue diamond, and suddenly they're not seen as rare. Like, are you going to have this issue?
Yeah. Well, it's rather like buses, isn't it? You wait all day and then 3 come along at once. I think yes, there was when we marketed the miniature 6 months ago, we said this happens once every 10 years, and here we are 6 months later, and we've got another one. So I'm sort of having to eat my words. But of course, when you generate a big price at auction, it does bring other things out of the cupboard, because people think that if it happens once, it's going to happen again. But often, actually, lightning doesn't strike twice in the auction market, and sometimes, second time round, you get a disappointing result. And third time round, some pieces don't sell. And I've known pieces that we've put up for auction that haven't sold, and then you'd put them back in the auction, and they sell for 3 times what they were estimated at 6 months later. So there's no rhyme or reason, and that makes our job very difficult. And a lot of it is actually gut instinct pricing, and knowing the market, knowing who's involved, who's going to participate. You know somebody's got a wedding coming up, so they might buy that piece of jewellery. Somebody else, their relation is unwell, and they're preoccupied, and they're probably not going to participate. Or it's Ramadan, and they're definitely not going to participate. We had to move our auction back because of Eid. It's on the 26th of April. So there are many different factors, some of which are just personal. And the other thing that outsiders don't often realize is that the whole art market is actually driven by very few people. Actually, in most fields, at the top end, it's a small number of stakeholders who are driving the market. And in my talk, I talked about His Highness the Aga Khan, Sheikh Nasser, Sheikh Mayasser, and David Khalili, and a few others. But these were the people who were generating all the big prices. And when we have bankers, for instance, who come into our business, often we have a new managing director, and he'll come from the banking sector, and they can't understand that we've actually only got 5 clients. I mean, we have many clients, obviously, but at the top end, where it really counts, the top end of the market, it's just a very small number of people. And when they drop out, I mean, the Aga Khan has left the market today, and now we have Malaysia as a new buyer, the Islamic Museum of Islamic Arts in Malaysia, which is also pushing the market, and they've sponsored a new Islamic gallery at the British Museum, very generous endowment, and there's a fabulous museum in Kuala Lumpur which they are filling with treasure, and they're driving the market. So many different factors, but provenance is king. I hope this isn't recorded. Is it being broadcast live?
Thank you. Thank you very much.